When I was a couple weeks short of my 70th birthday, I started thinking about my mother's mother, who lived to be 100, and her mother, who lived to be 102, and my father, who lived to be 90, longer than anyone we had ever heard of in his family. I began to think that maybe our generation could be the first to routinely live to be 100. When I talked about this at family dinner one night, my granddaughter, who was 5, said,
"What are you going to do for the next 30 years, Grandpa?"
Hello, I'm Dr. Janet Price.
And I'm Mye Kaloustian. And we are Oldish. And this is our podcast, Oldish.
If you're oldish or know someone who is, please join us every week for conversations amongst ourselves
And our special guests
about what it means to be oldish in the 21st century.
If you ever wonder whether you're getting old, you're oldish. What are you going to do for the next 30 minutes?
Hi, I'm Greg, and I'm Oldish.
Hi, I'm Janet, and I'm Oldish. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Oldish, Conversations on Aging in the 21st Century. Greg and I are so excited to welcome our guest from about a year ago, Joan Price. She is a renowned author, speaker, podcaster on the topic of sex for all of us who are aging. Her current book that we're going to be talking about some today is called Sex After Grief, Navigating Your Sexuality After Losing Your Beloved. It was written in 2019, and then as you read the book, you find out that Joan had some more to say between 2019 and 2024 when she revised it based on people's responses and more information that was coming in from readers and people impacted by sex after grief. So it's the impact on sex of loss and grieving and what happens to your sex life after the death of a partner. She used a phrase called rebirthing sex, and that seems to capture it all. She also has written some other books, which, Joan, you can add in. I wrote down Naked at Our Age, Talking Out Loud About Senior Sex, and Better Than I Ever Expected, Straight Talk on Sex After 60, which won an award, the 2020 Self-Help Book Award from the prestigious American Society of Journalists and Authors.
That was Naked at Our Age that won that award.
Oh, okay. Okay. So
Deservedly so.
Yeah, so this is such an exciting topic. I'm so happy, Joan, that you're back with us. We were talking as we were getting ready to start, and Greg reminded us, or reminded me and let you know that you were, when we spoke with you a year ago, it has been our most popular episode downloaded. So welcome back.
Thank you. I'm Joan Price, and I am 81 years oldish. Just had to insert that because I'm very proud of having lived so long doing my work, which I couldn't imagine ever not doing.
Yeah.
I love being with you again. I love the way you talk about aging and the way you are so accepting of not only the way we age and the wonderful things about aging, but also the challenges. And you have a sensitivity to people who are thinking, but I'm old and no one will want me. And you override that so well. So thank you both for the work you do.
Well, thank you for that compliment. And thank you, Joan. I do feel a special connection with you and just find everything about you delightful, that we can share in this mission of helping people as they age feel okay about it, good about it, hopeful. And sex is certainly a big piece of it, which definitely doesn't get talked about enough or thought about enough. And there are stereotypes that need to be broken down, both in the big picture of what Greg and I are doing, and then specifically around sex.
You're absolutely right. And then with today's topic specifically about sex after grieving the death of your beloved, because that's a topic that no one has wanted to touch.
I was fascinated in your book when you wrote and said that as you were doing research for this book and you were looking at some well-known books on grieving, that nothing was in those books about sex.
No, it was like that's taboo. That's off limits. And if I found any mention of sex in, I'd say dozens of grief books, which were otherwise quite helpful, if they mentioned sex at all, it was as a warning. Don't get into anything too fast because you really shouldn't be making decisions right now. And that's absolutely true if you're talking about getting married or linking your finances with someone. But having sex, you can be on grief brain and still want the comfort of touch and the stimulation of touch from another person.
Yeah, maybe especially so after grieving a loss or while still grieving a loss, because that's one of the things that you're grieving. We talked last year and we've had other conversations where when you make love with someone, one of the hormones that gets released is oxytocin, which is called the bonding hormone. And when the lovemaking stops, and because somebody's gone, the bond there is broken. The bonding is one of the things that helps us not feel alone.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because this is not something, I don't think I included this in the book, but when I was grieving Robert at the worst of the grief process, I felt like I was withdrawing from a drug. Nothing felt right. I was so disoriented. Besides being horribly, horribly sad and crying all the time, it felt as if I was being deprived of something that I had depended on. And it wasn't in the abstract. Yes, I love Robert and he's gone. It was something my body was craving. And it wasn't just sex. It was that those brain chemicals that you're talking about, Greg. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it seems important. One thing I want to throw in before I forget it, because that's one of the other issues of being oldish is the before I forget. What are we doing here anyway? What am I doing in the kitchen?
I know who
don't
you
remember.
are. Who am I?
That's right. Is that it's just almost exactly a year since we talked with you. And in that year, that episode, as Janet said, has become our most popular episode just recently. It just made it every day. It seems like somebody downloads and listens to it. The second most popular episode was actually 2 years ago. And that's an episode about pickleball. So I think what that tells us is that people are more interested in sex than they are in pickleball.
Golly, who would have guessed it?
Yes.
Were the numbers even close, Greg?
No.
Okay. That's reassuring. Otherwise, I'd have a lot more work to
No, the pickleball episode is kind of tailed off, and once in a while somebody will listen to it. But the sex one, of course. So sex is important as we're oldish. Everybody says, oh, if you want to keep being oldish, get exercise, get social, get intellectual stimulation, get out in nature, all of those things. Well, sex has all of them in one container.
Oh, you're so right.
It's a little bit surprising to me because people don't talk about sex much.
Well, I mean, what is sex? It's connection. It's release of stress. It's a whole body delight. Why is that so taboo? I mean, don't answer it because we don't want to spend our time trying to figure out why people see it wrong. But rather, let's help people see it differently.
One thing you were saying, Joan, as we were getting ready to start a recording, was wanting to get this book out as much as possible and, how to do that and where that response can be. And I was thinking that this age group or this generation of oldish and aging people, we're coming out of an era in our own young adulthood, our impressionable time, when sex wasn't talked about that much, but also at least I was taught when I was growing up that when you get older as a woman, you're not interested in sex anymore. And I remember feeling so worried and upset and just, it was like in my 40s, maybe in my 50s, and just thinking, please don't tell me that we just have to stop being sexual when I'm 50 or 60 or something. So anyway, I think the combination of not talking about it and what we've been taught are challenges.
We're not just taught, we're bludgeoned with that attitude. that sex at an older age, and by older, it could be over 40. And I laugh at that being over 80 and having no wish to slow down. But we're bludgeoned with the idea that old people having sex is icky, it's pathetic, it's ludicrous, it's just, it's cringeworthy. And nothing's far from the truth. It is actually beautiful. And it is in many ways better than young sex, which is propelled by hormones. When you aren't propelled by hormones, when those have receded, then you're having sex for other reasons. And we need to often, usually I'd say, make it intentional, make it deliberate to choose sex, because it doesn't just come on us as a hormonally driven propulsion that we have to obey the orders from our hormones. It's not that at all for us. We have to make preparations. We have to figure out how to have sex at the times of day that are best for arousal and orgasm, which is not after a romantic dinner, and it's not at night. And all these things. I believe we talked about these a year ago, but then it's been a year and I have no memory what I talked about a year ago. I'm sorry.
And any of it is worth saying again. So
something you said, Janet, just now was that we heard in our younger lives that women lost their interest in sex, or would lose their interest in sex after a certain age, whatever that might be, usually identified as after the change. But my recollection is being taught that women don't like sex at all, except for those bad women. Women have sex to make babies, and so they didn't like it at all. And I knew that wasn't true, but I didn't have the stats to prove it. But I noticed reading through the book, I don't know whether you did this on purpose or not, Joan, but there's a matchup between, you quote what you call grievers a lot. And the percentage of grievers in your book who are women matches up pretty well with the percentage of grievers in life who are women, because it's still the case that women outlive men. And so I was pleased, and pleased is the right word, to feel how many women said, oh, some period of time after my husband of 30 years passed away, I was surprised to feel sexual stirrings again, or lust, or words like that were used by women. And those couldn't have all been, you didn't just select out the bad girls from when we were kids.
Well, let me tell you something about the selection. First of all, unless someone specifically mentioned husband and didn't mention I'm a man with a husband, you didn't know that if they were women or men, because there are many, many stories from men, but they don't necessarily identify as this is a male story. It doesn't mention husband or wife. It mentions either partner, or it doesn't even mention that. It just says, I'm widowed. Everything I did in the book was on purpose, so thank you for mentioning that. It might have been. But I sought stories for a long time in the original book. And of course, I had to choose from the stories that were sent to me. There were plenty I didn't get that I would have liked. I would have loved to have received more stories from lesbians that I just didn't get. And I wish I had, and maybe if I do another edition, I will. I did get stories from men, heterosexual men and gay men. And in the 2024 edition, I didn't ask for new stories from people. I contacted the people who'd sent me stories before. And I said, I'm updating the book. What's happened since you wrote me last? And so many of the new stories that you read in the new chapters, there are 4 new chapters in the updated version of Sex After Grief. And many of the stories there are from men as well as women, and they are stories from the people who wrote me originally. One thing I did not try to do was link up the original time this person's story appeared, because that was just way too much work since I had so many stories in the first edition, sometimes you could tell, and usually you couldn't tell what the story was in the first place. But I had updated stories that made me so happy. People saying, yes, 5 years later, we're still together. Or, yeah, that didn't work out, but I learned a lot about myself. And now I am in a relationship that is really right for me. But then I also, and this led to a whole new chapter called When Life Throws You Curveballs. I got a surprising number of stories from people who said, and my second lover died too, or we are both having intense health issues, or I had to get out of that relationship because, I had so many sad stories as well. But I never thought for a minute, well, I want this to be a happy ending. I'm not going to, not for a minute. I knew I had to include them. So I wrote a whole new chapter around those.
It's a good chapter, too. It brought a lot of it back home to me because time goes by pretty quickly. And with a new relationship energy, when you're in a new relationship, it's hard not to think that this is it. This is going to last forever. This is really exciting. I'm in love again. And it's really hard not to think that, but it's not necessarily the case. And once the new relationship energy, or you mentioned something called a pilot light lover in the book. And so once the pilot light has moved on to the next thing, that the next person that needs to be lit up, or you've moved on because you're thoroughly lit up and it's time to go make the souffle or whatever it is.
The water is boiling.
That's right. The water's boiling. So yeah, you don't necessarily know that when you're in the throes of the new relationship energy.
I'd love to define some of those terms for listeners who might go, oh, well, I haven't read this book and I don't know what they're talking about. So the new relationship energy is the way our brain chemicals fire when we are first involved with a new person who has us really excited. And it feels like love. It, as you said, it feels like, oh, I am in love again. And it happens so fast. Hold on. It's the lust chemicals in your brain that are firing everything about you, all your emotions right now. Enjoy them. There's nothing wrong with them. They're fabulous. They recede. So don't marry, don't move in together on the basis of the new relationship energy. This term is used by non-monogamous people and polyamorous people because when you're bonded to a person and you've been with that person for years, you have a different kind of way you're turned on based on the bonding. But when you meet someone new, something happens to you and you just want to learn everything you can about that person. You want to spend all your time there. And for people who have more than one relationship and it is consensual, this is the lifestyle that they have chosen, the relationship modality they have chosen, then they know to give the partner space to experience that because that'll wear off. So yeah, enjoy it. It's getting high with a new person is really what happens. But then that fades over months, then it settles. If it's good, it'll settle into something that you want to nurture. But it might not. And it's okay if it doesn't. Once that settles down, you might think, I have really nothing in common with this person. And since I am no longer firing my lust chemicals at them, I think I want to move on. And that's perfectly all right. And that's something that I try to explain in a different way in the book. And as for the pilot light lover, this is a term that I borrowed from Gail Sheehy, who introduced it she's the author of Passages. That's her best known book. But she also wrote a book called Sex and the Seasoned Woman. And and it's kind of a passages for older women is really what that book is, more than about sex. But she describes a pilot light lover as the person who brings you back to sex after a long time without. And in terms of sex after grief, it's the person that suddenly, after you have been grieving and doing without sex and maybe thinking you'd never want sex again, It is the person who lights your pilot light, gets you burning again. And that pilot light lover likely will not last, but also that's okay. That's a role to be played. The first person who brings you back to sex, whether that relationship lasts or not, and it usually doesn't, it might not even be one you want to last. It might be, oh, wait, that's not relationship material, but they really turned me on. But what that does is it shows you that you have that capacity to feel sexual again, to enjoy sex again, to get aroused and have orgasms with someone new. So that's what that's about.
Joan, why don't you share a little bit about what motivated you and inspired you to write this book?
The love of my life, Robert, died in 2008. And during the time of my most extreme grief, I kept 2 journals. It had to be 2 journals in order for it to work for me. And I've taught this process to many people since then. One journal was only for recording the good memories because I wanted a record of them. I didn't want to ever forget when he said this, when we did that, the little love rituals we had, the jokes we shared, the special words we shared, the recipes he made for me, all of the wonder of what was our relationship. I didn't want to miss it. And so I would sit down and I would record a memory in that journal. But I had a separate journal that I called my grief journal. And that was my process. That was my extreme, profound sadness. That was my wailing. That was my memories of our last weeks. And I divided it because before I figured out to do that, and I was no grief counselor ever taught me that. I taught them that this is a good thing to tell people. But until then, I was stuck because every time I wanted to record a good memory, a bad one would emerge. When he was very sick and how I cried in the other room thinking I'd lost my best friend as well as my lover and my husband. That wouldn't let me do the other. So I thought, well, I'll just have 2 separate books. I'll do one and then I'll do the other. And whichever one, when I sit down, needs me first, I'll do that first. And I really, really recommend that. But this is a very long-winded way of answering your question. I wanted, once I was in a place of being able to, let me backtrack again. I'm going to give you more long-winded. I tried so many things to get back into connection with another human being on a sexual level. And I purposely say it that way because it wasn't just sex I wanted. I had drawers full of sex toys. I could give that to myself. But what I couldn't give is touch. It was looking into someone's eyes, was relaxing back and having someone else do this for me. I couldn't do that for myself. And I wanted that so badly. And I tried many things. I tried online dating and I would go back and hide my head under the covers. I tried old lovers and that didn't work for a long period of time. Then it finally did, but it didn't at first. I tried hiring an erotic massage. That worked. I highly recommend it. Don't judge me for that, people. It's a wonderful thing to just agree on the price and lie back on a massage table. And it all happens with consent. But then years later, finally in 2018 or so, I realized I was ready to write the book about not just my own grief journey and coming back to sexual place, because I did. I came back and got into a new relationship in 2017. Which is still going on, by the way. We're about to celebrate 8 years.
Wow.
Excellent.
Yeah, I know it can work. But I thought I've learned so many things about myself, but also from grief counselors, from regular counselors, from other grievers. And I thought, what would happen if I tried to write a book about sex after grief? about after your partner, your loved one has died, specifically that kind of grief, not losing, losing a mother, not losing a best friend, but losing your partner, because no one wrote about that. And what if I tried to do that? And that's when I started collecting stories. And that book came out in 2019. And I had to go to a very dark place to write it. I had to go and read the worst of the grief memories journal, because that needed to be in there too. And I needed to document, how soon before I was able to do that? Oh, really? It was that many years. Who knew? I didn't remember it clearly, but it was all written down. So that's a very long-winded way of answering your question. Then I was ready to write it, and I invited other stories, and people said, thank you, because I've had no one to tell this to.
Yeah. One of the phrases that really touched my heart was, you said, some of this book will include excerpts from all of these patches of my grief quilt.
Oh, I didn't remember I said that. Isn't that nice?
Yes.
Yeah.
I so appreciate that. Thank you.
Because it made me think of the
Yeah.
AIDS quilt, which was the
Yes.
first quilt I knew of that was capturing grief.
Exactly.
And that was touched my heart.
And that was in my mind, besides
Mhm.
also being so ragged.
Mm-hmm.
And that seemed like an appropriate way to be ragged, is to have these pieces of fabric.
I want to mention the additional audience for the book. I don't have the experience of losing a partner or a spouse to death, but I do have the experience of losing a long-term partner. I was married for 36 years. And a while later, I was in another long-term relationship that ended not because I chose to, or not because, just kind of out of the blue. And kind of in both cases, although the marriage was only out of the blue because I wasn't paying attention. But it's common in our age group for people to be widows or widowers or caregivers. Something also that you mentioned in the book is caregivers get a head start on their grief.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Anticipatory bereavement.
I don't want to say that the grieving after the breakup of a long partner-ish relationship is comparable, but it's definitely a grief.
Yeah.
And reading through your book, there was a lot of me that said, yeah, I wish I'd have known this. I wish I'd have known this in the first couple of 3 years after things changed. So there was a grief after change, I guess, is one of the things that I was feeling. And I know that that's really common among oldish people. The rate of, they call it elder divorce, has skyrocketed, really, because it's whoever expected to be married for 50 years, who expected to be hale and hearty at our age, so to speak. So,
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people who are experiencing that. So when I talk to people about recommending your book, I'll recommend your book to people I know that are going through the grieving of a breakup. And again, I don't want to say that that's comparable in real life, because I know that it couldn't be. There's one specific difference that I can remember, which is going through a period of denial, which could have been real. It's like, oh, this isn't real. She'll come back.
Yeah.
Which you can't do for a whole, well, I suppose you can, but it's more likely that that person is going to come back in a recognizable form than someone who's passed away.
I'm really glad you're bringing this up, because I was asked many times about that. I haven't had a partner die, but we just broke up and I'm miserable. And does your book have anything for me? And yes, it absolutely does. Most of the chapters would apply to a breakup or divorce. The reason I didn't include that or market it to that population is that there are many books about divorce. I'm thinking of one by Erica Manfred called He's History, You're Not. I love the titles. There are many more, but that's such a memorable title. But there are other books for people who are divorced or surviving breakups, whereas there's absolutely nothing for the kind of grievers that I'm welcoming into this book. But you're absolutely right that people who have lost partners in other ways can learn so much from this. But one of the big differences is because I debated this when I was writing the book because I'd been told, well, you'll have a bigger audience if you make it a little more inclusive. And I said, yeah, I will. But when you break up with someone, not only, as you said, Greg, can you think, well, maybe they'll come back, but also you'll run into those people again. You'll have to deal with that person, if you have children with them, still being in your life on some level. And that's something we could only wish for if our partner died.
Yeah.
So there are some really big differences. I thought rather than make my grievers, wade through other kinds of grief to get to what they need, I want to write a smaller book that's just for them. And now it's become a bigger book with the 2024 edition.
Yeah. So I would say to people who are going through a breakup, the way that you approach the questions, the way that you talk about coming back to life sexually and so on, works for people without all of the other stuff. So it would have worked for me, would have helped me to conceptualize what I was going through or what I might go through or how I might take care of myself or how I might talk to a new partner or that sort of thing. Because that's one of your big questions is talking with someone afterwards about what's the role of your late spouse or your late partner. What's their role in your continuing life and in this new relationship? I worried for years that I wouldn't be able to ever make love with anybody again because I would be thinking of that other person the whole time. And that's not fair to the person that I'm with. I don't know whether that makes sense or not.
Oh, absolute sense.
But so I would have found ways to deal with that question and ways to think about, not instructions, but ways to help me think about the context that it was all in.
And also ways to have step-by-step sex. I think that would have been very important in that situation where you would say, I'm not ready for full-on sex. I'm not ready for partner intercourse, for example, if that would be full-on sex for you. But I would love to kiss you for a while. And if that feels good, maybe we could touch a little, but let's stop there for now and see how that feels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would bring your book along on a date. And I would say, okay, so let's do page 47.
Oh, I love that so much. Oh, please, would you make a loop saying that, please, so I can bring my book on a date? Yes, please.
Yes. One of the structural pieces of your book, which I think is so helpful, is that at the end of each chapter, you have something called your takeaway, and it summarizes the key points of the chapter and makes it operational in the reader's mind by being able to help the reader think about, okay, so how would I do this? How would I bring that book with me and pull it out at the right time or whatever it might be. So I just wanted to say that for the listeners is that I found that to be really helpful. Even questions like you're going out on a first date, the first time you've gone out since your partner died, what do you talk about? Thinking ahead. What are some interesting questions? What would you like to know about them? What would you like them to know about you? I think, sometimes people get frozen in this next step, which seems almost impossible.
I love that you said all that, Janet, because as a public speaker, which is another part of the work I do, I'm very aware that people aren't going to remember what you said. Say I talk for an hour, who's going to remember any of it? But if I give them things to do as they're listening, write down 3 ways that you're going to incorporate this into your next this or that.
Yes.
Then they will have something to rely on. And the same thing in reading a book. They'll finish the book and they'll go, well, that was helpful. Well, what was helpful about it? Well, I might need to reread it to figure that out. But if as they go, they have the takeaway, what is your takeaway from this? With an action plan, do this after reading this chapter. It'll only take you a minute, but do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're more likely to be able to use it. So I really appreciate that was something that worked for you.
Before we run out of time, I want to make sure that I mention and give a shout out to one of our old friends who appears in your book a couple of times. You quoted Lynn Brown Rosenberg a couple of different times in the book, and she was one of our first guests. Yeah. Yeah. So I feel like Lynn's an old friend. Her book, My Sexual Awakening at 70, was
Yes.
an early leader in the downloads race, so to speak, and very popular. We've been in touch with her a little bit. So it was nice to see an old friend in your book.
Yes, and she was one of the people who then wrote something else for the second edition, who updated her story. And most of the stories, the names are not given, but for the people who request their names be included, such as an author of a book about exactly the same subject, then of course I included them. I want to say something about the book for the listeners before we run out of time, that I am selling the book, the new edition, from my website, joanprice.com. That's the easiest way to get it. And I hope that you will, listeners, I hope you will go there instead of giving the big you-know-who any more of the money that they do not need. But I'm doing a special for, it's going to be a temporary until I run out of the 2019 edition. Here's what it is. If you buy the 2025 edition from me, there's the opportunity to check a box that says, I would also like to receive a free copy of the 2019 edition to give away. And as long as the 2019s last, and that will probably only be a few more months, if that, then if you check that, then you will get not only the book you just bought, but a second book free included in that package. And I'm hoping you'll give it to your local library or to a grief counselor or to a regular therapist or a support group so that the word gets out that this book is available.
That's good to know. What a great idea, Joan, to
Thank you.
pair them up that way. And great that you're directing the listeners to your website.
Yes, joanprice.com.
joanprice.com.
joanprice.com. And we'll put that in the show notes for people who can't remember it, and on our website, as well as attached to the podcast, wherever you happen to listen to the podcast. Joan, are your books, is this book in particular available in bookstores?
It's available if you request it. It's not on the shelves. It's very hard to get shelf space for a book, and it has to already have a proven track record of, if I take space for this book, it will be worth my while. The bookstores have to think that way. They have to make a profit. And so if you go into your local independent store and you say, I don't see Sex After Grief on your shelves, there's a new edition, would you order it for me? They will. And then if someone else, maybe one of your friends, comes in and asks for it too, and they'll go, oh, we need to just have these on the shelves. And that's going to help other people, not just help me.
Yes. And I just want to say, as a therapist, a psychotherapist, that I'm looking forward to recommending this book to clients that I work with who are struggling with grief and sex after grief and sex after loss.
I appreciate that so much. And one audience that we haven't mentioned is people who are dating or are interested in dating grievers. What did they need to know about how this person's mind works? It's so important because, especially as we are oldish, if we are single and dating, we are likely to be dating either now or sometime soon a griever, because so many people are widowed. So instead of going into this blind or going, oh, I hope I don't make a mistake, read it, please. There's a chapter for people who want to date a griever. That should be your first stop. But then read the rest of it, because you want to know this person better. You want to understand what that person's going to be going through so that you can be tender with this vulnerable person.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. And if you're not dating a griever, if whoever you're dating, be tender with that person.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Because we're all vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly are.
One thing that I want listeners to know is just the underlying tenor of the book, which is about acceptance, curiosity, caring, forgiving of things that the person involved with the griever might start to take personally, but then realize if the griever, I loved when you were writing about if the griever is talking about their lost one or has pictures of them or things around the house. You said at one point in your book about someone saying, well, your house is like a mausoleum to your former partner. It's like, okay, that's one way to look at it. And one way to look at it is this is a person that was part of the griever's life, will always be part of them, part of their memories. And it's something the new person can share with the griever as far as just being curious and caring and loving and open. I also wanted to say, kind of along those lines, that I really appreciate how you just are open about the audience, about the ways that you can move through this. Something you were saying earlier with us today about getting a sexual or erotic massage, things that I think in our generation and older, maybe that's like possibly taboo, like don't talk about it, don't think about it. It's like, hey, all these things are out there, polyamory, all these things, same sex. I appreciate that about you and about your writing.
Thank you. Thank you. And I encourage readers to be non-judgmental, to put their assumptions of what place sex has, whether it's just after marriage or within a Christian family. We come into this kind of thing with our preconceived notions. Put those aside. Learn from people instead of coming in and say, well, no, oh, ew, how could anybody do that? The erotic massage, for example, how could you do that? It was easy, actually. It was just saving the money for it. No, it was very easy to do that because it was exactly what I needed at the moment. And it just took a chance. It could have gone wrong, sure, but it didn't. It went absolutely right and taught me some things. But we need to learn to be non-judgmental about other people. I sometimes have to laugh at the 1-star reviews my books get, all my books, because of that embracing non-traditional relationships and all kinds of sexual orientations and relationship modalities. I'm not there to judge you. I'm there to say, so what works about that for you? And can we share that with others that might benefit from knowing that? So open your mind. It will only help you.
Well, that's certainly some wise words there, isn't it?
Thank
And,
you.
it's one of the things that I'm constantly baffled by is how can somebody get to be our age and still be judgmental?
Oh, they do. They are.
I know they are. And it's
They
just
are.
like,
And
how
it's
can you
self-limiting.
holy smolies. I can't believe all the mistakes that I've made and all the things that I've done wrong.
Yeah.
And how am I in a position to judge anybody else?
And as I say to people, actually, can I tell you a story from when I was teaching high school many, 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 many years ago? I was a high school English teacher for 22 years and loved it. At one point, I had this wonderful class, and I was telling my best friend, who happened to be a gay man, about how fulfilling that class was, how responsive, and how I loved that class so much. And he said, could I drop in and just listen to one of your discussions? I said, absolutely, you can. I got him a pass to do that. And so he just sat in the classroom quietly. I introduced him. And because he was wearing a lavender shirt and an earring in one ear, the class decided after he had left that he was gay. Well, he was gay. So they asked me, is your friend gay? Yeah. One of the students in the class said, I want to talk to you privately. I said, come in at lunchtime. And he came in not alone, but with the whole football team. He and the football team, most of whom were not in my class, came in and said, so we have a problem with your friend. And I said, what problem do you have with my friend? Well, we think gay sex is disgusting. And I said, oh, well, then I have a solution for you. Don't have gay sex. The boy who was in my class said, is it that simple? I said, yeah, it's that simple. And then the whole football team laughed. And I just love how that happened, that the one boy, because he was open-minded, is it that simple? It's that simple. Okay, guys, let's go. There you go. And decades later, I think about that. And for the people who say, oh, I don't believe in these things that you're saying, I'm not telling you to do anything you don't believe in. I'm saying, here are some things people do. Take it or leave it. Learn about it and leave. Take the team with you.
Or give the book to somebody else and be quiet.
Yeah. Take what works for you and leave the rest.
I like it. That's a good story.
Well, thank you, Joan, so much for spending time with us, for this open, enjoyable, joyous conversation about sex after grief.
I love that you could use the word joyous and grief in the same sentence, but that's the thing. That's what we're going after, is recovering our joy, because it's in us. We just have to say, okay, I can let it out a little bit at it.
Very, very wise stuff. So I love the book. I'm going to make sure to tell everybody, not only our listeners, but everybody I run into, you should be reading this book. It should be, this book and the Naked at Our Age book, I think should be required reading for everybody over 60.
I love that you're saying that. Are you going to bring them to pickleball too?
Yes.
All righty then.
So we wish you the best, and maybe we'll meet again.
Well, why don't we do this at least every year?
Okay.
At least every year.
All right.
I vote for more often. Let's see.
More often, because who knows what the future holds, right?
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's a great idea. Right. We'll see you in a year or sooner.
Or sooner.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Or
much.
sooner.
You're
Bye.
welcome.
Well,
Bye.
Thank you, Joe. Bye-bye. Bye, Janet.
Bye, Greg.
That's it for now. Thanks for listening. This feels like an enormously important discussion. Please share this and Joan Price's books with your oldish friends who may be grieving or dating someone who is, and perhaps their families too. Joan Price's books can be purchased directly from her at www.joanprice.com. Please take her up on her offer to send you the 2019 edition as well when you purchase the 2025 edition of Sex After Grief. Upcoming guests include Jeff Armstrong, host of the Aging Well podcast, Liz Kitchens, author of Be Brave, Lose the Beige, and our Oldish Book Club. We're reading The Old Man and the Sea. All previous episodes of Oldish can be found at www.oldishme. Please consider clicking on the support button to help us keep making these important conversations. You can leave comments or requests for topics or guests on this or other episodes at www.oldish.me. There's a link there, too, if you've wondered how you can help support our podcast. If you like what you heard today, please tell a friend and rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to love everyone.